My father passed away at 11:15 a.m. At 11:17, my boss asked if I could finish the report before leaving. The vibration of the phone against the polished walnut table was the only sound in the room. It was a short, dull buzz, barely audible over the hum of the HVAC system, but in the silence of the executive conference room, it felt like a scream. I didn't look at it immediately. We were in the middle of the Q3 pre-audit review, a ritual that required absolute stillness and feigned attention while Victor Keynes spoke. Victor was the head of strategic operations, a man who wore Italian wool suits and spoke in a cadence that suggested every word cost the company money. He was currently dissecting a utilization chart that I had built for him 3 days prior, claiming the metrics showed a robust upward trajectory due to his leadership initiatives. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and ozone. The projector fan whirred, a low, constant drone that usually faded into the background, but today it scraped against my nerves. The phone buzzed again, 2 distinct pulses. My father, Thomas, had been in the hospital for routine monitoring. Heart failure is a slow, tedious erosion, a gradual dimming of the lights, but he was stable. He was an engineer, a man of structure and predictability. He didn't make emergency calls. He believed that interruptions were a failure of planning. I slid my hand over the phone, face down on the polished wood, and tilted it up just enough to see the sliver of light from the screen. It wasn't my father. It was the hospital's primary care desk. I stood up. The movement was quiet, but in the orchestrated theater of Victor's presentation, it was a breach of protocol. Victor paused mid-sentence, his laser pointer hovering over a bar graph like a red sniper dot. He didn't turn his head, but his eyes shifted, locking onto me with a look of polite confusion that barely masked his irritation. He hated when the props moved, and in this room I was a prop. "Nora," he said, his voice smooth, curated, "we're reviewing the OPEX variance. I was just getting to the efficiency gains." "I have to take this," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't sound like my own. It sounded like a recording of a calm person played back in an empty room. "It's the hospital." I didn't wait for permission. I walked out of the glass-walled room, feeling the eyes of the 4 other directors on my back. I stepped into the hallway, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of my heels, and answered. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. The doctor was kind, professional, and efficient. He used words like massive cardiac event and rapid decline, and did not suffer. My father was gone. The engineer had signed off on his final project. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The cars below were moving in steady, rhythmic lines, arterial flows of red and white lights in the gray afternoon. The world was continuing. The sun was hitting the glass of the adjacent skyscraper, blindingly bright. I felt a cold, hollowing sensation in my chest, a physical weight that seemed to press the air out of my lungs, replacing it with a vacuum. I hung up the phone. The silence in the hallway was terrified. Not the hallway itself, but my place in it. I was suddenly untethered. I needed to leave. I needed to drive to the hospital, sign the papers, call the funeral home, and handle the logistics. My father would have wanted the logistics handled. He raised me to be capable. "Grief is natural, Nora," he used to say, "but chaos is a choice. Secure the perimeter first." I turned back toward the conference room. I couldn't just vanish. I had the encrypted keys for the data repository on my laptop, and the audit submission was due at 5 p.m. I walked back into the room. Victor stopped talking as I entered. He looked at his watch. It was a reflex, a subtle dominance display. "Everything all right?" he asked. It was a cursory question, the kind you ask a vendor when they're 5 minutes late with the catering. "My father just passed away," I said. The words hung in the air, suspended in the cold light of the projector. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of empathy. It was the silence of calculation. The other directors shifted in their seats, looking at their notebooks, their tablets, the grain of the wood table, anywhere but at me. They were mentally rearranging their schedules, wondering if this would impact the meeting duration. Victor blinked. He set the laser pointer down on the table with a precise click. I'm very sorry to hear that, Nora, truly. I need to leave, I said. I have to handle the arrangements. Victor nodded slowly, his face arranging itself into a mask of somber concern. He walked over to me, placing a hand on the back of the empty chair next to mine. He lowered his voice, creating an intimate sphere of conversation that excluded the others, though they could certainly hear every word in the acoustically perfect room. Of course, Victor said. Family comes first, we all understand that. He paused. The pause was a weapon. The butt was hanging in the air, invisible and inevitable. However, he continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming softer, more reasonable, we are 6 hours away from the oversight submission. The partners are looking at these numbers first thing tomorrow. You're the only one with the reconciliation context for the Western region variance. The algorithm won't accept the raw feed without the tags. I looked at him. I was processing the death of the only parent I had left, the man who taught me how to read a schematic and how to ride a bike, and Victor was talking about regional variance tags. I can't be here, Victor, I said. I can't focus on this. Victor sighed. It was a sound of disappointment, the sound a parent makes when a child fails a simple test. Nora, look, if you leave now, the submission is incomplete. If the submission is incomplete, the audit fails. If the audit fails, he gestured vaguely to the room, to the building, to the firm itself. We have to reconsider the structure of the team. We need reliability in this role, especially now with the merger rumors. The message was clear. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't a threat of firing, not explicitly. It was a statement of reality within the corporate ecosystem. If I walked out that door to bury my father, I would be marking myself as unreliable. My position, which I had built over 5 years of 70-hour weeks, missing birthdays, working through holidays, would be reconsidered. He was leveraging my grief against my career. He was betting that my fear of losing my status was stronger than my need to mourn. You want me to stay, I stated. I want you to finish the submission, Victor corrected gently. It's the reconciliation data, just the final cleanup. 2 hours, Nora, then take all the time you need. Bereavement leave is standard, obviously. Take a week, but we need to get past this hurdle first. He smiled, a tight, encouraging expression that didn't reach his eyes. Do it for the team, then go be with your family. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:15 a.m. I looked at the whiteboard, covered in buzzwords, synergy, optimization, vertical integration. My father had warned me about men like Victor. Nora, he had said, sitting on his back porch, cleaning his glasses, corporations have no memory, they only have records. Never mistake your labor for loyalty, and never mistake their payment for gratitude. If you passed away at your desk, they'd post your job before your obituary. I looked at Victor. I saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't a leader. He was a parasite attached to the host of my competence. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a tension cable being cut in a deep, underwater trench. The connection between my self-worth and this building was severed. The fear of losing the job evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Okay, I said. Victor's shoulders relaxed. He patted the chair. Good. I knew we could count on you. Professionalism is what separates us, right? It's what makes this department elite. Right, I said. I sat down. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed, waiting for my password. I'll need to work at my desk, I said. I need the dual monitors to finalize the data sets. The refresh rate in here is too slow. Go, Victor said, waving a hand, dismissing me now that he had what he wanted. Get it done. Send the confirmation when the upload is complete. We'll order lunch in. I walked out of the conference room. I didn't go to the elevator. I went to my desk, a glass-enclosed cubicle in the center of the operational floor. It was a fishbowl, designed so management could see us working at all times. I sat down. I placed my phone on the desk, face up. I touched the screen once, looking at the picture of my dad and me from a fishing trip 3 years ago. He looked happy. I was not going to work for 2 hours. I was going to work for 45 minutes. And I was going to give Victor exactly what he asked for. The firm was a reputation-based entity. We sold strategy, optimization, and efficiency to Fortune 500 companies. Our internal metrics were supposed to be the gold standard. In reality, they were a mess of deferred decisions, inflated projections, and hidden costs. My job officially was strategic operations lead. Unofficially, I was the filter. Data came in from the regional offices, messy, ugly, problematic data. Costs were too high, timelines were blown, vendor contracts were bleeding money. My role was to take that raw data and apply contextual adjustments. This didn't mean lying, not technically. It meant adding explanatory notes that allowed us to move bad numbers into different columns. $1 million loss wasn't a loss. It was a strategic capital reallocation for Q4 readiness. A missed deadline wasn't incompetence. It was market-driven timeline optimization. I spent my days writing the narrative armor that protected Victor and the other directors from the oversight committee. I smoothed the edges. I hid the cracks. I made the incompetence look like strategy. Victor relied on this. He didn't know how to open the raw SQL databases. He didn't know how to parse the unformatted Excel sheets. He only saw the PowerPoint slides I built for him. He assumed the cleanup I did was a minor administrative task. He didn't understand that I was the structural integrity of his career. He thought I was a secretary with a spreadsheet. He didn't realize I was the structural engineer keeping the bridge from collapsing. I logged into the oversight portal. The submission window was open. The specific task at hand was the Q3 operational variance report. This report determined the bonuses for the executive team, including Victor. It also determined the budget allocation for the next year. Usually, this process took me 6 hours. I would go line by line. I would see that the Western region was over budget by 40% because Victor had approved a vanity project with a vendor that was owned by his college roommate. The project was titled Brand Velocity Initiative, but it was essentially a series of expensive retreats and consulting fees for work that never materialized. Usually, I would flag it. I would call Victor. He would say, "Coded under R&D," so I would move the numbers. I would write a justification note. Pilot program testing for 2025 rollout. The 40% overage would disappear into a bucket that oversight rarely checked because R&D was expected to burn cash. I would see that the client retention rate had dropped. I would exclude the clients who had left within the first 90 days, labeling them non-qualified leads, artificially boosting the retention percentage from 82% to 94%. I was the editor of reality, but today I wasn't an editor. I was a griever. And grief, I found, brings a terrible, wonderful focus. I opened the raw data file. It was ugly. It was stark. It showed a department that was bleeding cash, missing milestones, and covering it up with buzzwords. I looked at the upload screen. There were 2 options for submission. Curated report, this was the standard. The polished lie. The document Victor presented to the board. Raw data appendices, this was a compliance requirement. We were required by corporate governance to upload the raw data, but no one ever looked at it because the curated report was what they presented in the meetings. The system, however, automatically cross-referenced the 2 if, and only if, the meta tags weren't applied to suppress the flags. I didn't open the PowerPoint. I didn't open the executive summary template. I took the raw data from the server, the data that showed the vendor kickbacks. The data that showed the ghost employees on the payroll in the satellite offices, consultants who billed 40 hours a week but hadn't logged into the system in 6 months. The data that showed Victor had spent $40,000 on client development dinners that were actually just him and the other directors drinking expensive wine in Napa. I did not manipulate a single cell. I did not change a 0 to a 1. I did not delete a row. I did not sabotage the file. I simply stripped away the context. I removed the notes column. I removed the justification column. I removed the deferred status tags. I removed the strategic reallocation filters. I prepared the file. It was just numbers. Cold, hard, undeniable numbers. If I submitted this, the automated oversight algorithm, which usually slept through our audits because I manually overrode the triggers, would wake up. It was a dumb program, but it was rigorous. It would see a 40% variance with no justification code. It would see travel expenses exceeding the cap by 200% with no client billing codes attached. It would trigger a Level 4 audit. A Level 4 audit wasn't just a meeting. It meant the system locked the accounts. It meant the digital keys to the bank accounts were frozen. It meant human auditors from the compliance office. A separate, terrifying building across town, filled with people who hated the operations department, would be notified immediately. It meant the narrative was no longer in Victor's control. I sat there, my hand hovering over the mouse. The cursor pulsed on the screen. I thought about the last time I saw my father. He was in the hospital bed, hooked up to the monitors. He had held my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Don't let them grind you down, Nora," he had whispered. "You're better than the work you do." Victor didn't believe I was better. He didn't believe I was anything other than a function. I selected the file, Q3 Final Raw Unfiltered CSV. I uploaded it to the primary submission slot. The system flashed a warning, a red box popping up in the center of the screen. Alert, no executive summary detected. Variance justifications missing. Cross-reference anomalies detected. Submit anyway. I stared at the prompt. This was the moment. If I clicked cancel, I could spend the next 2 hours lying for Victor, save my job, and go bury my father with the knowledge that I was a coward. If I clicked yes, I was burning the bridge while standing on it. I moved the mouse. I clicked yes, the progress bar filled. It took 10 seconds. 10 seconds to undo 5 years of careful curation. Upload complete. Submission ID, number 994 Alpha X status, received. It was done. I stood up. I didn't clear my browser history. I didn't delete my emails. I left everything exactly as it was. The evidence of my action was open on the screen. I opened my drawer. I took out my personal belongings. A spare charger, a bottle of ibuprofen, and a framed photo of my father. I put them in my purse. I left my laptop on the desk, the screen still glowing with the submission successful notification. I took off my employee badge, the plastic rectangle that had defined my identity for half a decade. I placed it on the desk, right next to the mouse. I walked to the elevator. The office was humming with activity. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, people rushing to meetings. No one looked at me. To them, I was just Nora walking to the restroom or the break room. I was part of the furniture. As I passed the conference room, I saw Victor through the glass wall. He was laughing, leaning back in his chair, gesturing with a coffee cup. He looked confident. He looked like a man who knew the girl was handling the paperwork, that his kingdom was secure. He didn't look up. He didn't know that the floor had already dropped out from under him. I pressed the down button. The ride to the lobby took 30 seconds. The walk to my car took 2 minutes. The air outside was cold and crisp, smelling of rain and asphalt. I took a deep breath. It was the first breath of real air I had taken in years. I drove to the hospital. I cried the entire way, not for the job, for my father, and for the time I had wasted protecting people who would replace me in a week. The next 3 days were a blur of somber logistics. Funeral homes, caskets, obituaries, relatives flying in. I didn't turn on my work phone. I didn't check my email. I left my devices in a drawer in the kitchen, buried under a stack of unopened mail. My father's service was on a Thursday. It was a rainy, gray morning. The cemetery was quiet, the grass vibrant green against the wet earth. The people who came were his friends from the engineering firm, neighbors, family, real people. People who built things with their hands. People who understood that if a foundation is cracked, the house falls. There were no flowers from the firm. When I finally turned my personal phone on Friday morning, the notifications cascaded in like a dam breaking. The device vibrated continuously for nearly 2 minutes. 42 missed calls, 18 voicemails, 63 emails. The first few were from Victor. Timestamp, Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. Nora, the system is flagging the submission. Call me. Timestamp, Tuesday, 3:15 p.m. Nora, did you upload the raw file? The dashboard is showing red across the board. I can't edit the fields. Fix this. Timestamp, Tuesday, 4:45 p.m. Nora, pick up the phone. Compliance just emailed me. They're asking about the Western Region vendor spend. Where are the justification notes? The system locked me out. Then the tone changed. The panic set in. Timestamp, Wednesday, 9 a.m. Nora, this is a formal instruction to report to the office immediately. Failure to comply will be documented. Timestamp, Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. This one was from HR. Miss Whitman, please contact us regarding an urgent investigation into the Q3 data submission. Your access credentials have been temporarily suspended pending review. I didn't listen to the rest. I didn't reply. I made coffee. I sat on my porch, wrapped in a blanket. I watched the rain drip from the eaves. Around noon, my personal cell rang. It was Elise Morgan. Elise was a peer. She sat 3 rows over. She was smart, quiet, and kept her head down. She knew how the game was played, but she didn't have the access I had. She was the only person in that building who knew the name of my cat. I answered. Nora. Her voice was a whisper, as if she were hiding in a closet. Hi, Elise. Oh my God, she breathed. Are you okay? I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry. I wanted to call sooner, but it's been a war zone here. Thank you, Elise. I'm okay. Nora, what did you do? I took a sip of coffee. I submitted the report, Elise, just like Victor asked. He wanted the reconciliation data submitted by 5 p.m. The place is on fire, she said. I mean, literally, people are running. Tuesday afternoon, about an hour after you left, the oversight system locked the accounts. Red screens everywhere. Every monitor on the floor just flashed, audit lock. Victor tried to override it, but because the file was submitted as a final compliance record, he couldn't edit it. He was screaming at it, but they couldn't do anything because the lock came from corporate compliance. I listened, feeling the warmth of the mug in my hands. I could imagine the scene, the frantic typing, the blaming. The auditors showed up Wednesday morning, Elise continued. Real auditors, suits, briefcases, the works. They marched into Victor's office. They've been in there for 2 days. They're going through everything. The vendor contracts, the travel expenses, the utilization rates. They froze the department budget. And Victor? I asked. He's blaming you, she said. He's telling anyone who will listen that you sabotaged the data, that you were grief-stricken and unstable and you corrupted the files out of spite. The files aren't corrupted, I said calmly. They're accurate, that's the problem. There was a long silence on the other end. Right, Elise said softly. That's what the auditors are finding out. They pulled the backups. They see that the numbers match the bank records. They asked Victor why he approved the payments if they weren't in the budget. He didn't have an answer because you usually write the answer for him. I hope you're staying clear of it, I said. I'm invisible, she said. But Nora, they fired him about an hour ago. Security escorted him out. He was shouting about loyalty. He looked small. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel happy. I felt a sense of completion, a balance sheet that finally zeroed out. They're going to call you, Elise said. The big bosses, the partners, they're panicked. They need to know how to fix the database structure. They don't know where the files are linked. They know how to fix it, I said. They just have to stop lying. Take care of yourself, Nora. You too, Elise. I hung up. The call from the firm came 2 days later. It wasn't HR this time. It was the regional vice president, a man I had met only twice, a man who lived in the stratosphere of the company, far above the operational grime. Nora, he said. His voice was warm, paternal. It was the same tone Victor had used, just more expensive. First, let me express my deepest condolences for your loss. We were all shocked to hear about your father. Thank you, I said. We've had a difficult week here, he said, transitioning seamlessly. There were irregularities in the department. Victor Kane is no longer with the company. We've identified significant gaps in his management. I see. We understand that you left under duress. Victor put you in an impossible position. We want to make this right. We'd like you to come back. We need someone who understands the data architecture to help us. Restructure. We're prepared to offer you the director title. A significant raise. We need stability, Nora. It was the offer I had worked 5 years for. The corner office. The recognition. The money. It was the validation of all those late nights. But I knew what they really wanted. They didn't want my leadership. They wanted my silence. They wanted me to come back and put the context back into the numbers. They wanted me to build a new shield, a better one, to cover the mess that Victor had left behind so the stock price wouldn't dip before the quarter close. If I went back, I would own the mess. I would be the one explaining why the numbers changed again. I would be the new Victor, just with a different title. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I won't be returning. Nora, let's be reasonable, he said, his voice tightening just a fraction, the mask slipping. Leaving without notice, causing a compliance lockout, that could look very bad on a reference check. It's a small industry. We're willing to overlook the disruption if you help us steer the ship. I didn't cause a disruption, I said. I submitted the data exactly as it exists in the system. If the truth caused a disruption, that's an operational failure, not a personnel one. There was silence on the line. He knew I was right. He also knew that if he pushed me, and I spoke to the external auditors who were undoubtedly sniffing around by now, it would be much worse than a localized departmental failure. "We will send your final check," he said coldly. "Please send it to my attorney," I replied. I didn't have an attorney, but he didn't know that. "And please include the payout for my accrued vacation time. I believe I have 6 weeks saved up." I hung up. I didn't work for 6 months. I used the severance and my savings. I renovated my father's house. I learned how to sand floors. I learned how to fix plumbing. I did work that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Work where if you made a mistake, you saw it immediately and you fixed it with your hands, not a spreadsheet. The firm took a hit. The Q3 audit resulted in a restatement of earnings. The stock dropped 8%. It recovered, eventually, because giant corporations always recover. They are designed to survive the people inside them. But the department was gutted. Elise told me later that they hired 3 consultants to do the job I used to do alone. They installed new software. They held ethics workshops. It didn't matter to me. I found a new job eventually. A smaller company. Logistics. Real things moving on real trucks. I made it clear in the interview. I do not massage numbers. I do not manage egos. I manage data. They hired me on the spot. I often think about that moment in the conference room, the vibration of the phone, the look on Victor's face, the realization that I was a tool to be used until I broke. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my competence was a constant, like electricity or running water, something they were entitled to. They forgot that the person who builds the system is the only one who knows exactly how to dismantle it. I didn't burn the building down. I just turned on the lights. And for people like Victor, the light is the most dangerous thing in the world. If you enjoy stories about the quiet power of competence, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel more than you know.